and welcome. It's the Graveyard Girls.
A true crime and mysteries podcast.
Yes. Well done, Natasha. You remembered it this time.
I remembered. It's not the witch trial season.
It's because we've done so much recording for the witch trials.
And I'm so tired.
Yeah, we're so brainwashed.
I've got a fluey, coldy brain. I don't know what I'm saying anymore.
I'm just tired.
I'm very tired as well.
And this is a big. I've got a big case, so I've got lots of reading to do.
I've got to concentrate. Okay.
Yeah. So have I. No, I've picked this one. I have. Well, I think it's a murder mystery. Basically, this one's given me vibes back to my very first case I did. So for anyone that doesn't know, my very first case was the murder of Florence Nightingale. And the reason this one gives me sort of vibes is because this one is called the Midland Railway Mystery. And it results in the death of a man named James Gray Lowe in 1886. So we're going all the way back. So it's a nice historical case. It's on a railway and he results in the man being dead. Now, the reason I'm saying it's sort of a murder mystery is because the thing that makes this case different was the fact that they could never decide if James committed suicide or was murdered.
Ooh.
So
why would you commit suicide on a train?
Well, we'll find out, Natasha. I am leaning more towards it being a murder.
Okay.
But there is some things in it. Ultimately, it could kind of be a suicide. It would just be a very unusual suicide if that was the case. But I don't think it's impossible. But I also picked this one because it's a case close to home. Because by the time his body was discovered, it was discovered at Leicester Station.
Oh.
So, yes. So, it's one that's local to us. Now, so basically I wanted to look into this case because I wanted to kind of decide, is it going to be a suicide or a murder mystery? And who do we think, if it was a murder, who did it?
Who did it? I don't think he did it himself.
Neither do I, but...
Like, why would you kill yourself on a train? I get people who kill themselves on a train track.
Yeah.
That's slightly different than a train.
But also, when I go into the circumstances about it, if it was someone else, it's not impossible for someone else to murder, but it would have been incredibly hard for someone else to murder him. So I don't know how he would have been murdered, which is why they couldn't decide whether it was a murder or suicide, because we don't know how he would have been murdered. So I'm going to get into the case before I keep skirting around it, but like, woo, I don't know what it is.
I know. Aliens.
No, it's not aliens, Natasha.
Or Quantum Leap.
No, I don't think so.
Sam Beckett came in. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I liked this one as well because it's a very little known case. I hadn't heard of it before. And obviously, me being me, I like to get myself stuck down a rabbit hole. And I very much got stuck down a rabbit hole with this one.
You like to do old ones?
I do like to do old ones. I don't know if it's because it's so complex and complicated to find the information. Because I took this from the same... Well, it wasn't the same book as the Florence Nightingale one. It's written by the same author. So he did unsolved murders, but then he goes around and he's done for several different cities up and down the UK. And this was taken from a book called Foul Deeds and Suspicious Deaths in Leicester. So that's how I stumbled across this one. But it's written by the same author that did the Florence Nightingale one. So I sort of read his, and then obviously I wanted to back up the stuff that he'd said, and so I put it into Google, and everything that was related to it came back to his book. So no one else has covered this. There's no other articles of it, whereas some of his other murder cases, like the Florence one, other people have covered it throughout the years. But his genuine one, he's the only one that's brought this to attention. So then I was struggling to find the answers to my question.
He murdered them.
No.
He went back in time.
Oh, okay, well, the time machine.
Yes.
Okay, so that's how he got his book.
Yeah.
But yes, obviously I was struggling for information because I don't know. He must somehow have access to archives, and that's how he gets his unusual cases, because it wasn't mundane sort of stuff that I could find out about. So I was, obviously, when I first read this book, I had a hell of a lot of unanswered questions. So I wanted to find out more, and I couldn't find any more. So then I had to go into the British National Archives, the bits that I could get access to. And I had to try and find a newspaper article from the day. It wasn't that easy to find, so I couldn't narrow it to an area. So I literally had to go through all the newspaper articles from that year that were in the archives and hope I could find something on this. So the way I've written this case is I've written it from everything that I got from the book first, which is how I made my notes. I've then got my questions that I had after I read the book. And then I'm going to go into the bits that I then found from a single newspaper article, which was the only newspaper article I could find. So I've only got 2 sources for this. And I don't know as though the newspaper article opens it up anymore. It doesn't necessarily answer my questions. If anything, it kind of gives me some more questions, but it might help us in making a decision as into what's happened. So I've got to kind of split it.
Sorry, what's this man's name?
His name is James Gray Lowe.
No, the author.
Kevin Turton. I'll include a link to his book in either in our episode. Oh my god, what's it called?
Show notes.
That's the one. And I'll tag it on the Instagram page as well. But yeah, he covers he's a really good author. I found loads of cases through his. I think my second episode as well, the Charles one, that was from the same book. Yes. Yeah. So, and I've got another case from one of his books that I'm finding quite interesting. But again, it's like this case, I want to find some more information on it, and I haven't yet. So I've got to do a bit more research for that one before I can write it up. But I'll get into this case. So obviously very little is known about this, and the first mystery of all, it literally starts off with a mystery as being, who did he meet on the day that he died? What we do know is that James was a Manchester businessman, and on Friday the 20th of August 1886 he was travelling to London. A friend said that he'd been travelling south to collect a debt. The payment in question was a sum of £1,200 in that day. So in terms of today, that's a hell of a lot of money.
It's probably like £1 million.
Yeah, which was a little over half of a £2,000 debt. So instantly I'm thinking, is it a robbery? That was my first question when I read this first bit, but I thought I'd keep an open mind. Who was it that owed him the money, or even who actually paid him? Did we know who that person was? But nothing is known about this transaction, but it's thought that the transaction was to be conducted in cash. Obviously eager to return home with that amount of money, James had then bought a first-class ticket of the 12:01 a.m. Scotch Express from London to Edinburgh, so it would be a night train. So you think back to how it was in the olden days, it's not how trains are today. So he was then given 15 shillings and 6 pence in loose change, and that was according to the man that had given him his ticket. He was the only occupant of carriage number 643 or 643. I don't think there were 643 carriages. That was just the name of that carriage.
That's a long
It's a long train. And he took his seat a few minutes before the train was due to leave. Possibly intent on deterring any other passengers from joining him in that carriage, he pulled down the window blind on the platform side and closed the carriage door. Now, normally the way it would happen on the train is obviously you can pull your own window blind down, but the carriage doors would have remained open and the guard of the train would go along and shut all the doors at the end. So he decided to shut it before, or that's what was put forward. Another passenger by the name of Mr. Groves, who was travelling to Nottingham, noticed the blind closed as he ran towards the train. Now, he was running late and almost missed the train. And not wanting to impose himself on another man's privacy, he boarded the next carriage along. So how the old trains were, you couldn't travel through the train like you can today between carriages. You were stuck in that carriage. Yeah. And the only way to get off would be, when you got to the next stop, would be get off that carriage and walk along to the next one. The train itself left on time, and the journey was uneventful until after it had passed through Luton station. Mr. Groves, who was obviously in the next carriage, who had slept through the journey up until this point, said he was rudely awakened by what he described as a loud crack. Convinced...
He was slept from London to Luton. That's a very short
Yeah, so you think it's quite late in the evening. It's 12 o'clock, so it's midnight. He was probably tired. He was going to get off at Nottingham anyway. He just said he was already tired before he got on the train. He's obviously running a bit late. He started to doze off pretty much as soon as he sat down on the train, which kind of does make sense. Yeah, considering the time of the day as well. You think it's midnight. Yeah. So you'd naturally be going to sleep at that point. And I think he was an older man from what I can work out as well, so nods off pretty easily.
Yep.
So he said he was rudely awakened by what he described as a loud crack. Convinced that a stone had been thrown up against the glass of his carriage window, he said he jumped to his feet in a startle, expecting to find a hole in the window. But there wasn't one. He said he spent a few moments running his finger along the glass surface in search of signs that the glass had been cracked by something. After finding nothing, he convinced himself that he must have dreamt it up, sat back down in his seat and dozed back off again. He would be disturbed a second time when the train stopped at Leicester station. Hearing a commotion, he opened his carriage door and saw a guard retrieve a gun from the running board beneath the window of the carriage behind. Now, a running board is something, today it would be the gap where the step is, and in the old one it would have been like a step up into the carriage, and it runs alongside the carriage. Some of them then run all the way along the side of the train, but depending on the type of train. But basically it sits on the outside, so it's like a little ledge is the best way, because at first I was a bit like, oh, is it just a flat piece of metal? It's kind of metal, but it's a bit of a ledge. So obviously it sits under the side of the carriage, and they would have traditionally been one on either side, I think. The guard then pulled that carriage door open, only to find James Gray Lowe lying dead with a single gunshot wound to the head. The only sign of disturbance within the carriage was a broken umbrella, which was near the body. The police were notified, and James's body, as well as the carriage, were examined, and this is where the mystery begins. The window of the carriage was intact and closed as it had been since leaving the London station. The first impression was that he'd committed suicide, but there was insufficient bloodstaining, so no blood spatter, around the carriage to support that idea, and no blood on his clothing, only a pool of blood around his head. The running board on which the gun was found, which ran outside the carriage, it ran the length of every carriage, and it was clear that the bullet had been fired at Mr. Lowe, but how the gun had remained on the footboard and not moved since leaving Luton baffled police. It seemed impossible, because you think the train moving, it'd just fall off the ledge. So it was then a case of, is it a suicide or is it a murder? So at this point, everyone's certain he's the only person in the carriage. If you shoot yourself inside the carriage, where's the blood spatter? And also, how did the gun end up outside? So this was already what was confusing police. When the gun was examined, it was found to have been made in Belgium and was an imitation of an American Smith & Wesson. Upon closer examination, it was discovered that the gun had actually fired twice, so it was a revolver type of gun. The first bullet misfired and was still in the chamber. It was the second shot that had been the fatal one. The gun was a revolver type and was 8 inches in length. It was this fact that caused disagreements and confusion amongst gun experts who examined it. A gun that length used for suicide and firing at that angle would have caused, and with the wound caused, meant that James must have been stood up and aiming using his right hand with the right arm bent towards the head. However, there was no gunpowder burns to his hair or any singeing of the hair and the air around it. So
that way.
That's how you would traditionally commit suicide. That's what they're saying. However, there was no singeing, so that's close range, which would cause singeing. There wasn't any of that around his wound, which would suggest he'd been shot from a distance.
Okay.
So it was suggested that he would have had to have been shot at close range, but no burning suggests that it wasn't close range. So they're contradictory. In an attempt to clarify this, Leicester Chief Constable Mr. Duns had a gun taken to a gunsmith and weapons expert called Henry Clark from the back of his shop in Gallatry Gate in Leicester, so very near us. A series of tests were carried out in order to replicate the wound as best as they could, whilst at the same time establishing the distance from which the shot had been fired. They would use the body of a dead dog.
No.
I know. Firing close to the head created a blackening of the fur and lots of singeing, which obviously the body didn't have. From a distance of 6 inches, the same effect occurred, but to a lesser extent. But from the distance of 1 foot, no blackening or singeing occurred and created an almost perfect replica of the wound. It appeared based on that evidence that James must have been murdered. But how? Because how are you going to do it from a foot away? You can't obviously hold the gun a foot away unless you've got a very long arm. The chief constable was a thorough man, and he had the gun returned to the railway station, where by this time the carriage had been moved to a secluded railway shed and set up ready for more experiments. After a lot of trial and error, it was discovered that if a man opened the carriage window and leaned out of the carriage and held his right arm at an angle with the weapon in his hand, a distance of 1 foot from the temple area of the head could be achieved. And I thought, how? Because how's his arm going to grow that long? Now, I'm going to do a little demonstration for you, Natasha. Maybe we should have videoed this, but I'll do a little demonstration to show you.
Okay.
Obviously, we established like this.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a traditional way, but there's no singeing, so it can't be that close. So they're saying a foot away, which is probably that here, and I thought that's quite hard at that angle. How are you going to do the trigger? Seems still pretty impossible. Yeah. So they were proposing that he was hanging out of the carriage window, and I thought, well, how the fuck is he going to do that? So then I did it like this, and what they were saying in the thing when they tried it out, if they did it like this way and he used his thumb, they could get a foot away. So that's what they were proposing. That's how they were proposing he shot himself. Right?
So him dangling out the window is for what? So it'd fall out?
No, I don't know. Well, this is obviously part of the mystery. Yeah, it seems a very unusual way to shoot yourself. It was also found that if the gun was then dropped, there would be a reasonable chance it would strike the running board beneath and come to rest on the ledge. So that would explain how the gun ended up on the outside, and I suppose then maybe from the force that he could fall back into the carriage. But it's still, I'm a bit iffy about that. Mm-hmm. According to his report, this happened almost 70% of the time, and that it's therefore completely rational to argue that suicide was more than likely. No. He could, however, not explain how the window had then been closed after the shooting. Because if you remember, it would still remain closed. So I'm a bit like, well, it's got to be a murder then.
Yeah.
So an inquest was held at Leicester Town Hall before the coroner, George Harrison. These theories were debated at length but found to be unsatisfactory, particularly after it was shown that a man of James's Lowe's size would not have been able to hold the gun any further than 6 inches from a head reasonably and be able to pull the trigger. To do so, as demonstrated, would not allow him to pull the trigger with his forefingers, so he would have had to do it with his thumb.
Sorry, would there be any gun residue on his hand?
Yeah, but I don't know whether they could have tested much for that then.
True.
A Dr. Clifton, who examined the body, poured cold water on the theory when he told the court that the man must have been standing when the bullet hit him, and he would certainly have sustained blood staining on his jacket. He held up the coat in court and reiterated his original findings that there was no blood either flowed from or splashed onto it at any point. Dr. Clifton had also examined the carriage shortly after the police had been alerted, so he was one of those that was first on scene.
Okay.
So at this point, it's sort of looking like the police have explained how he could have shot himself. Okay, that's fair enough. But also it's very unlikely that he would have shot himself in that manner. So he could have shot himself using his thumb, but they said the power of the gun, most people would have done it with their forefingers. Yes. The only way if you wanted to go back to the suicide defence, is if the fact that it misfired the first time, maybe it misfired because it wasn't powerful enough him doing it with his thumb. But again, how did he fall back into the carriage, and how did the window shut?
It's the force of him going back in, and then that somehow closed the window.
Maybe.
I don't know.
It's very strange. At this point, I'm like, I'm pretty certain it's a murder, but if it's a murder, what are they doing to investigate it? So then London police would add more confusion when they told the coroner that despite extensive inquiries and after showing the gun to every gun shop owner in the capital, they'd failed to identify its owner. And no one had ever said that James owned a gun either. So we didn't know whether it was his, or we didn't know if it'd been left by the killer. By the afternoon of the hearing, and in an attempt to produce a solution, the coroner decided that the jury were to be taken to see the carriage. It was his hope that if he allowed them to access this, they could probably produce a more comprehensive theory than that offered by the experts. But on arrival at the railway shed, it seemed clear that the only one method that existed that would appear to offer up any accurate assessment of the facts, that being that he'd been murdered rather than a suicide. But obviously the prosecution were going with suicide, so the jury and what the police found were very opposite of each other. The jury believed that James had been shot from the outside of the carriage by a gunman who had walked along the footboard. So I'm going to look into that theory a little bit next. The police had already discounted this, but hadn't actually attempted to replicate it. The younger men of the jury did succeed in showing that it was feasible to do exactly that: pull down the carriage window, fire the fatal shot, and then drop the gun whilst trying to clamber back into the carriage behind. Back in the courtroom, it appeared a possible resolution had been found. The shot would have been shot somewhere between Luton and the next stop, which was Bedford. The killer had successfully evaded capture, possibly leaving the train as it stood at Bedford station, leaving the murder weapon behind. This was a reasonably sound theory until it was pointed out that on a moving train, this kind of murder they were trying hard to prove was impossible to carry out.
Okay.
Railway management argued that anyone that attempted such manoeuvre would have been knocked off the carriage side by any tree, tunnel, platform or any other train that had passed by, so it wouldn't have been possible for them to cling to the side of the carriage. To add to this fact was the fact that if the gun had been fired twice to create the misfire, the length of time on the footboard and on the moving train was not possible. So basically, this person would have to hold the gun as well as cling to the side of the carriage, shimmy down the side of the carriage. It's not wide enough, you can just walk along it. Also, open the carriage, shoot it without him being able to, on the inside, get up and wrestle you off, because he could just push you back off the window and you fall into the track.
Yeah.
So this person has got to be agile and strong enough that they can cling to the side of the carriage, open a window and shoot quick enough, but also he misfires and has to shoot twice. So you think the length of time and shimmy back to get into the carriage behind.
And also close the window.
Yeah. So it seemed at first more plausible than the suicide, but now when you look at it like this, again, that seems impossible. And at this point, they know that he was alone in the carriage. So did he shoot himself or did someone else shoot him? So it was getting very complicated.
Do we know for a fact he was all by himself? I know
Yes.
he closed the door.
Yeah.
And closed the blind.
Well, this would be eventually one of my questions was he actually alone? But when I get onto the newspaper report later, I'll kind of explain that a little bit.
Okay. I'm just trying to think.
Yeah, because this is as I'm going along, that's my first thought of, could there have been someone else in the carriage? But even still, how is that person getting out? And how have they not got blood splatter? And why is there not blood spatter? You would expect blood spatter on the inside of the carriage. Even if, do you see what I mean? If he shot him, there should be something, up like the wall of the carriage or something. There was nothing. So it seems a genuine
I don't know.
mystery. I know it's a tricky one, isn't it? Which is why it's so good. So I was like, I've got to read more. So to disprove the theory even more, three railway workers then told the court that they'd examined the train carriage by carriage from both sides of the track as it stood at the station at Bedford at 22 minutes past 1 in the morning of the killing. Obviously it was dark, but it says that it was their job to grease the wheels. In order to do that, they had been forced to climb down beneath the carriage, and according to their testimony, they categorically denied that any gun would have laid on the running board and would not have been seen by them. So how it used to run at the train station, when it comes to stop, they have to grease everything to get it going again. They had to go along the whole train to do that. They're claiming that even though it was dark, they have to go along the running board. So they sort of hold onto the running board and scrape underneath. They're saying one of them would have noticed that either by touching it as they clambered down or when they were on the inside going along the wheels. They're saying one of them would have noticed the gun.
Okay.
And there was 3 of them. So at first I'm a bit like, okay, it's a bit dark, maybe it's not impossible. But my main thing is still, how did the gun not fall off the ledge? I don't understand how it didn't fall off the ledge.
Unless I'm kind of thinking of it this way, like there's a board and then it's like the bit that connects it to the train. Is that like hollow or is that like...
From the pictures I looked at, it looks pretty flat.
Oh, okay. I don't know then.
And it's almost like then there's also a bit of a gap, so it's like it should have fell down almost through, and onto the tracks, or gone the other way and fallen onto a platform when it come to a stop. So, or it should have like slid all the way down the footboard, from another carriage.
Yeah, I just had a thought. What if he was on top of the carriage when he got off at Leicester? The gun fell out of his pocket, landed on the footboard as he ran off.
Possibly. But then again, how did no one see it at Leicester? Because it's this. How did no one see him jump off the top of the train at the train station?
It was dark.
But this is what I'm saying. It's so strange. I don't understand how this could have happened. So, on that day, as the inquest drew to a close, the coroner examined final evidence as to the state of James Lowe's business in an attempt to discover if there was any reason existed for him to commit suicide. As a businessman, there was little doubt that he had accumulated debts at some point, but there was no evidence existed to show his company was in any sort of difficulty or that his creditors were demanding any money. On the contrary, it appeared that he'd been paying his bills on time. The only suspicious circumstances police had uncovered was the fact that he'd taken out multiple life insurance policies, but these had all been taken out a number of years ago with the exception of one. The most recent one had been taken out in March 1886, so 6 months earlier, for the sum of £8,000, but he'd signed a clause precluding payment if he committed suicide within 13 months of the policy starting. So if he'd committed suicide, he wouldn't have got the payment. So yes, it was a bit strange. He had multiple policies taken out, but actually been paying these for years and he'd never tried to claim anything before. So did he just have multiple policies to cover himself.
Yeah. Okay.
So, turning to the jury at the end of the day, the coroner asked the jurors to consider the evidence, not forgetting the broken umbrella. This item had not been considered relevant by anyone who'd presented a theory that day. But was it? The coroner asked. Had there been some sort of fight inside the carriage prior to the shooting? Now, we don't think, there's no evidence that anyone got off at any of the other stations in between. It only stopped at 3 stations from when he got on at St Pancras to him being found at Leicester. There was only 3 stops. The same guard that was on this train, it was the one that was at London, and he travelled with the train. Okay. He was the one that let everyone on, and he says no one got in the carriage. So that means they would have either had to been on there before he got on the train, or it's been missed. But the guard was pretty certain no one got on that carriage. So also, how would they have got off without being seen? So 1, they've got to get on without being seen, and 2, they've also got to get off. It's quite difficult to get both ways without being seen.
Yeah, because there's a door either side of the carriage, right?
Yeah, but even then with the way it was on the tracks, because the railway workers, you think, are greasing the wheels, someone would have they would have gone each side, to quickly get down the train. Someone would have noticed at some point, wouldn't they? Because you think the railway workers would have been on the side that's not the platform. So that's 3 people greasing the wheels. You would have hoped they would have noticed someone jumping off a train. Yeah. And then on the other side would have been the guard on the platform, as well as other people getting off the train and the station master. So it's quite difficult for this person to get off without being seen. It's not impossible, I don't think, but it's incredibly difficult. Yeah. So the jury returned the verdict that the deceased died of a revolver shot, but by whom it was fired there was not sufficient evidence to show. It was never decided if it was murder or suicide, and so this is how it remained unsolved. So at this point, I have a few questions. The first one was he obviously the only person in the carriage? Could someone have jumped out after shooting him, or get on off at Bedford without being seen? So I was sort of thinking, as the train was slowing down, would it be possible for them to jump off without being seen? But again, they risk injury to themselves. They've still got to get out. Because if I remember rightly from when I did the Florence one, a lot of these stations at the time, they only had one turnstile to get out of, and it was run, the station master was always there, so you would have had to pass him to get off, so they could log exactly how many people. The only way you could do it was if you jumped off the train before it meets the station. That's
what I was thinking, because sometimes it does slow down enough so you could possibly get off.
So it depends on the type of station and what it was like beforehand. Okay. So... Second question, this is a big one. Why was he collecting a debt? What was that debt for? Could it have been linked to illegal activities? So obviously someone owed him money, but obviously it's also a large amount of money. Also, the next question, why did he travel at that time of night? Was there a reason he needed to get back so quickly?
Or get out of London so quickly.
And what business did he run? All it said was he was a businessman, but what business did he run? I wanted to know that. Also, did he have any families and friends, and who were there? And my final question, it mentioned this debt of £1,200, but in the book it never says, was the £1,200 found on him and that's how they know he collected the debt? Or did someone say he was going to collect a debt of £1,200? If he didn't have it on him, was that because he didn't collect the debt, or because it was a robbery and that's why he was murdered and the money was taken? Yes. So this was all my questions, I'm thinking at the same time, which is why I wanted to Google it and find more. And obviously I couldn't. So I was like, I have too many questions and I can't answer them. So I managed to find one newspaper article. And this newspaper article added a lot of information, but it also...
More questions.
Yeah, more questions. It slightly answered some questions, but it created more. So this is where I need everybody's help. So mainly at the moment, it's going to have to be you. But then if anyone else can think of any theories, they're going to have to put it in the comments. Because this one is genuinely, I don't think we're going to solve it. Well, we're not going to solve it. And it's going to frustrate me. But it's also a really good case. So I basically, after spending a ridiculous amount of hours trawling through a newspaper thing, I tried typing in Leicester Mercury. Obviously, the only thing I knew is it was from Manchester, so I was going for all the Manchester ones. I was looking for London papers. I could not find fucking anything. And then after the way I did it was I had to type in newspapers from 1886. So this obviously happened in August. I had to trawl through every single one in the archive from the 1st of January of that year. 27 pages later, I found a newspaper article in the Manchester Times from Saturday the 28th of August. Now, this is 8 days after he was found dead. Because even when I got up to the day he died, I was looking for the day he died and the day after, and I still couldn't find anything. I was thinking, at what point do I keep going? And luckily I found something by the time I reached the 28th of August. Otherwise, I think I might have been crying. So this newspaper article revealed that it was a six-chamber revolver. So for anyone that doesn't know, basically it's like a little chamber that goes round and round. So that explains, I already knew this kind of myself, but this explains how it was able to misfire and the bullet was still in there. And that's how we know it was the second shot that killed him. So that confirms that bit, so that's fine. A season ticket was found on the deceased from London to Manchester with the names of James G. Lowe, Langley Place, Victoria Park, Manchester. So that confirmed for me that it was definitely the right man. And rather than it just being like a bit of a ticket, he obviously must have travelled a lot to have a season ticket. So already this is saying, okay, this is a man that has obviously connections to London quite a lot. So I thought, is this linked with his business? I then managed to find out that he was a merchant. Okay. So it didn't say exactly what he was, but at least now we've got a better idea of what sort of work he worked in. It then went on to say that a Mr. Edwin Almond, a solicitor of 16 Kennedy Street, Manchester, appeared for the relatives and friends of the deceased in court. A man by the name of Benjamin Burks Spires, who was a guard of the express, so that would have been the guardman that worked on the train, and this is what he states in court, that at 7 minutes to 12 on Friday night, the deceased gentleman came to him at St. Pancras and asked him if he would keep his ticket for him, as he wanted to have a good sleep, and if he could keep a compartment for him, as he wanted it to be quiet. So basically what that means is the deceased James approached this man and says, look, I'm going to have a bit of a nap before the train goes off. I'm going to get in the carriage, find me an empty one. I want to get in it, and then I don't want to be disturbed. So this goes back to, was he in his own in the carriage? This would suggest yes. He was. Because Benjamin specifically looked for an empty one and then asked him to keep it. And I thought, okay, someone could have got in without noticing. And then this is where the next bit gets in. Benjamin said that he thought there'd be no problem with this, as he was virtually the only one who purchased a first class ticket, and he was the only first class passenger for Manchester. The deceased then gave him the ticket, and Benjamin locked the carriage door. Thereupon the deceased cried, "Don't lock the door, I have a perfect horror of locked carriages. The carriages might turn over on its side in one of the tunnels," which is a rather unusual thing to do. So he's obviously a bit of a paranoid or has some weird fear.
Well, no, it makes sense.
It does make sense, but it was not what I was expecting for him, the Benjamin guy, to say. So Benjamin said that he told him he would not do so if he did not wish.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But it turning over, I get locking it for the outside, but inside it's not safe at all.
No.
Imagine if they locked the trains now, you'd be like, well, they do lock them in between, but then
so basically that's what the guard used to do. Naturally they just locked it so that it can't fly open mid-journey. Okay. So that was normal practice as far as Benjamin was concerned. That was what he would, and because he'd said he wanted it to be kept quiet, he thought, well, he's already got in there, I might as well lock it now, even though the 7 minutes till the train goes.
Might have saved his life.
So obviously Benjamin said he told him he would not do so if he did not wish it. But he thought that if he locked him in, it might help keep the passengers from St. Albans and Luton out. So Benjamin was thinking, well, you wanted the carriage to yourself, I might as well lock it. Benjamin added that the carriage might turn over on that side, and that as the other side was kept locked also, was so obviously already locked, he would still be locked in. Benjamin said the deceased replied, "Just so," which was a very strange response to that. So basically he's telling him... So basically he's saying... okay, you don't want the door locked, I won't lock it on this side, but actually if the carriage falls on this side, the other door's locked anyway, so you're still locked in.
So basically, if he left the door locked, he would have saved his life.
Yes, basically.
Okay.
Benjamin noted that at St. Albans, which was the next stop, and Luton, the stop after that the windows were still shut and the blinds drawn. Supposing this deceased still to be asleep and not wishing to disturb him, he did not keep his promise and to unlock the door, so he locked it. So he did lock it because he thought, but he's asleep now, so he's not going to know that I've locked it, so he locked it. Which then begs the question of, if there was someone else in the carriage, how did they get out? Because it can only be locked from the outside. Obviously, he hasn't looked into the carriage. He believes him to be asleep. He hasn't seen anyone get on at St. Albans, and he hasn't seen anyone get on at Luton. It's at Luton that he decides to lock the door against James Lowe's wishes. So if anyone's going to get in the carriage, it must have happened at either London, and Benjamin didn't see it, but then again, you would have expected James to have said something, or, which then only leaves the only other stop, which is St Albans, in which case this person would have had to get in, but now that also means that Benjamin has locked them in the carriage with him. So how did they get out?
I don't like this.
Yeah. So that basically meant from this point, no one could get in and out, which then goes back to your suicide theory.
No.
I don't like the suicide theory either, but if there's no one in the carriage and no one can get out, the only plausible thing at this point, even though it doesn't sound that plausible, in a really freak accident, could he have done it with his thumb by doing that? Like I said, the only thing we then can't account for is the window shutting afterwards. But at this point, it's, in terms of the court, it's starting to look like, well, maybe he could have committed suicide, because who else was there?
Depends. Is it like a spring window?
I don't know. I was trying to look at it. I think it's just like, you know, on old buses where you just like you slide it down.
Yeah.
I don't.
Why would he kill himself?
Well, this is still my thought in my head, but
how would he kill himself?
Basically, they're saying he's done that by.
Yes, I know, but no.
Because if he was to shoot it at close range, one, there should have been singeing, and two, you would expect splatter on the inside of the carriage. There was no blood spatter on the inside of the carriage. So even if someone else had murdered him inside the carriage, where's the blood spatter?
Someone who can walk through carriages.
But they can't.
No, they have an ability to walk through things.
So yeah, so it's still getting very strange at this point, and I'm like, this is incredibly frustrating.
There's no way in from like the roof, is there? There's not.
No.
But I don't know. I don't like it. Is there a way in from the floor?
I don't think so.
Okay.
It wasn't mentioned anyway. He saw no more of the deceased until the arrival of the train at Leicester, when the revolver was found. So he was the one that also saw noticed the revolver on the footboard. He obviously picked it up and thought, okay, something's not right here. He unlocked the door and found the dead body lying on the mat of the carriage floor in a pool of blood round his head. So there was no blood spatter. Obviously there was blood because he'd been shot in the head. The blood wasn't enough to have soaked onto all his clothes, but there was a pool of blood round his head. So it was Benjamin, obviously, that let him on thing, but it's also Benjamin that's found him. I did then think, is he suspicious?
Yes. Because he's the only one. He's like, oh no, I locked it. I unlocked it when I saw the gun. I put the gun there.
But also, there's obviously not very long at these stations. He's the one that's got to go along and unlock all the carriage doors. It's a bit of a fit for him to then go and murder a man in between.
Especially if he's got like 600.
And if you want to believe Mr. Groves, the first man, it happened while the train was moving that he heard the crack, because he presumed it was a stone that had flicked up at the window. So that means the carriage was moving. If you want to believe that was the gunshot, it could have been, Mr. Groves could have been right and thought that he dreamt it up, and he's only associated with it now because they found a dead body. Yeah. But if you want to believe what he said, that cracking sound, if you are half asleep, it's not going to seem as loud as what it actually was. So if that's the case, it's got to be moving. Well, Benjamin would have been inside the train with the train driver at the front, because he gets off at each station. So it couldn't have been him.
Does it make sense? I don't know.
I know, it's so good. So he then said, he was then asked if he noticed anything peculiar about the deceased. He said no, and that when he met him, he seemed a perfectly sober man. Now, at first, I thought, is a bit of a strange thing to say, and I don't think they mean sober as in like not drunk. I think it could mean that, but they meant a man of sound mind when I looked at the language. So he was basically saying no, there was nothing unusual about him. There was nothing that caused me any concern. He was then asked about the revolver not falling off the footboard after being discharged, and Benjamin explained that the deceased occupied what was called a bogey carriage, and that it did not oscillate even when travelling at high speed. So basically the carriage didn't shake like the other ones. So although it was unlikely, he felt that if the revolver had been placed on the footboard at St Pancras, there was a small possibility it might have made its way all the way through to Manchester without falling off, but it was unlikely, but they weren't saying it was impossible. So that opened up about the thing of he maybe could have been shot either at St Pancras or St Albans, but again, I don't see how it could have been done. Police Constable Shaw, who searched the remains of the station, found when they got to Leicester Station, found on him a gold watch, a chain and other property, but no purse or money. The coat was buttoned up and clothing bore no appearance of a struggle. Now, if you remember, the ticket man said he'd given him 15 shillings and 6 pence. The police officer didn't find any money on him. So where is the 15 shillings and 6 pence? Which then also opens up the fact of, could he have also had the £1,200 debt that he collected, and that has also been robbed. So I'm now thinking, okay, robberies. I'm now up to it is looking more still like a murder, with robbery as a possible motive. Dr. Pope, who did the post-mortem, disposed to find a fracture right across the skull and extracting from it a bullet which had been flattened, obviously by the force of entering his skull. The appearance was consistent with a self-inflicted, as with any other kind. So, but at first I was like, I don't get what that means. Basically, what it means is he's saying the type of injury his head is sustained is both could have been self-inflicted, but equally the same could have been inflicted by someone else. So again, he's not confirming whether it was suicide or murder. He's saying it could have been inflicted either way. So that does not clear up whether it was suicide or murder, which adds more confusion.
Okay.
Well, not add more confusion, it just doesn't answer anyone's question. It doesn't narrow it down. Then, Mr. Lowe of Claremont, Queens Road, Southall, said that the deceased was his brother, and he was the one that confirmed he was a merchant of the age 42, living at 46 Richmond Grove, Manchester. His brother produced and read several letters written by the deceased on the preceding days that were sent to his wife and others, all of which tended to show that he'd left Manchester on the Friday with the full intention of returning there on the Saturday. The brother also explained that the deceased and his wife and family had been staying at Buxton for 3 weeks. Now, I believe that's Buxton, that's near Derbyshire, so it's sort of in between the two. His wife was dangerously ill and indeed hanging between life and death. That's what was reported in the paper, so I'm guessing that means she's gravely ill.
Yeah.
Which then threw up another question for me of why is he travelling if she's that ill? So that then seemed to me that like this debt might be quite important. I did consider, could it be for her medical care?
That's what I thought.
But also it's a rather large amount. So I'm still thinking a possible criminal activity that was gone unnoticed. It also appeared that in the previous week, the deceased had gone to London in order to receive the £1,200, which was due to him. On his return, he expressed great disappointment that he had not received it. So they're saying this is a week before. So he's gone down when he's killed, this is the second time he's gone down to go and collect this payment.
Okay.
And that in his possession was found a copy of a letter to his debtor. So that's the person that he sent the letter to. So Mr. Lowe read the following letters, which had been addressed to his wife and a friend from the office at which he usually wrote his letters in London. So this now confirmed my thing. He has an office in Manchester and also one in London, which explains why he's so frequently travelling between the two. That explains the season ticket. So I thought, that's brilliant. Okay, so now I'm going to go on to, there's 3 letters. So I know you like a letter.
Okay.
So this first letter was sent from Great Winchester Street, EC London, so I'm guessing that's Eastern Central London.
I don't know.
I think that's how, because obviously you got like East London, but it says E.C. London, so I'm guessing Eastern Central or East Central. On August the 19th, 1886. So this is sent the day before. Well, technically it's 2 days before, because if you want to believe it would have been the early hours of the 21st that the body was discovered. But he left the train station on the... Oh no, it would have been the 20th, because he boarded it on the 12:01. 20th of August, so just after midnight. So yeah, 19th of August, the day before. And the letter reads, "My darling wife, no telegram when I arrived, which was a great disappointment. As the doctor promised to wire this morning, I at once sent him a telegram, and immediately after Palmer's wire arrived." And at first I thought, who's Palmer? And I couldn't clear it up, but I do later, he is a doctor. "I'm so awfully gratified that you're somewhat better, but for everybody's sake, take the greatest care. I have a second appointment with the man I came to see at 4:30, so this prevents effectively me getting away at 5. But I am to get the money, so all is right. I shall leave at 12 and go through to Manchester. I don't think I need stay long in Manchester in the morning, so you shall expect me out by an early train. I told William to write to Buxton tonight, though, just in case I went there direct, but this letter will keep. It's awfully warm, such fun, love to everybody. Your most lovingly, Jim." So I thought it was quite a sweet letter that he sent to his wife. Also, again, it confirms that he was getting the 12:01 train from Manchester, so it backs up all the little bit. So I'm thinking, okay. So I'm guessing he was supposed to meet this man at 4:30, and he didn't believe he'd be done by 5, which is why he's getting such a late train. They're then in pencil, written underneath is "P.S. I got the money." I never established who wrote the PS, whether it was him and then the letter got sent, or whether it was someone else. Because he would have sent someone within his office then to send the letters.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, because obviously it says P.S. I got the money, that would suggest that he wrote the letters, had the meeting with the man, penciled that in, got the letter sent off. But if he's not meeting this man till 4:30 in the afternoon, how did that letter get sent off in time, like, to reach his wife to let him know he's going to return the next day? He would have surely had to have sent that out by lunchtime. Yeah. So it seemed very strange. So who wrote the P.S. I got the money? I was a little bit confused.
His ghost.
Maybe. I don't know. But I wondered if it was someone afterwards trying to send a bit of a I don't know, like a decoy, but I don't know why someone would do that.
I think in the Victorian era, they used to deliver post every hour.
Okay.
So maybe this...
Yeah, but still from London to Buxton. I know it would have arrived by rail, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But even still.
Okay.
So it answers some of my questions, but then again it's given me a few. So it also backs up what the brother was saying about the wife being ill, but in this letter it suggests that maybe she might have been getting a little bit better. So that slightly contradicts what the brother said.
Or it's just like a good day.
So the second letter was sent from Great Winchester Street again, EC London, on the 20th of August. So I'm guessing that's the day that he dies. So, dear Mr. Dow, if you've had an hour to spare tomorrow, maybe you could kindly come to Buxton to see Mrs. Lowe. And if you will advise me on the hour, I will arrange for Dr. Palmer to meet you. So I'm guessing Palmer from the previous letter is this Dr. Palmer. I saw Mr. Raysworth about Mrs. Lowe's case, but he'd not been to the house. I can tell you why when I see you. The flooding recommenced on Saturday and has continued until this morning. The doctor applied ice. Now, I was very confused about this. I thought he was talking about the weather, but then he said the doctor applied ice. So I'm wondering if she has some sort of wound or is having sweats, explaining the flood. I'm just wondering if it's language for the time.
Yeah.
That's the only thing in my head I can sort of think it is. So she got some sort of fever, the flood being a pouring of sweat. He applies ice to cool her. That's the only thing I can think it was. I left Buxton this morning and will return tonight to Manchester and on to Buxton in the morning between 10 and 1. Yours, James G. Lowe. So that was to be obviously sent to another doctor who he obviously wanted to take over the care of his wife. But he said he would explain why when he met him. So now I'm wondering, is there something going on there? Because he won't tell him in the letter. He will explain when he sees him. Yeah. So...
You want it written down. So
Yeah.
It's a bit suspicious.
So then I'm wondering again, if there's a legal activity and maybe the person involved in the debt, is it something to do with the current doctor? I obviously don't find out the answer to this, but it threw another question up. The third letter, which was only a copy of another, which had apparently been sent. The deceased expressed his disappointment under the date of August the 13th, so this was just over a week before, at not having seen his correspondent, and added, I shall reply in your placing of £1,200 on my account on Monday next. Tuesday will be running me too close. I will give you to the end of the month for the balance. So this is obviously the one that the brother was referring to, saying about the debt. So this is the only evidence that there was a debt. So this was obviously sent on the 13th of August. So I'm guessing this is when the first meeting went wrong. He writes this letter to say, look, I'm giving you till Monday to sort it out. Tuesday will be running me too close. Now, why is Tuesday running him too close? What is he in trouble with? His business obviously isn't in any financial trouble, which makes me think it's some sort of criminal activity that nobody else is aware of. He obviously owes someone else money. He's using the money from this debt that he's collecting to pay off the other person. And does he need it before Tuesday? Maybe he needs it by Wednesday or Thursday or something. So Tuesday's too close. It's running too much of a risk for him to get the money.
Yeah.
Because if you want to put it out there, if he didn't get the money through this debt, he's going to have to take it out of the business. And how would he take it out of the business without other people knowing?
Yeah.
So this is for me where I'm sort of thinking, is there some sort of criminal activity involved? So the brother added that the deceased went to London on the Friday to obtain the 1,200, but whether he had done so or not, there was no evidence beyond the penciled postscript, which was the one in the letter where he wrote the P.S. I got the money, which then made me think, was it the brother that wrote that rather than him? It was a bit unusual because the brother seems to be the only one that knows about this. The brother explained that he was to have met the deceased in London by himself on the Friday, but that the appointment was not kept. So he was supposed to go and see his brother on Friday and didn't in the end. So that doesn't put him in London and able to commit the murder, but also why he didn't explain, or in this newspaper article, he didn't explain why he didn't go to see his brother in the end on the Friday. So Mr. Bennett, who was a gentleman connected with the deceased's firm in Manchester, said that the cashier could not find any trace of a 1,200 being due in London, but that Mr. Lowe suggested that there might have been some due for something unconnected with the business. So he put forward maybe some betting account, which would be separate from the thing. So okay, that would explain a large amount of money.
Yeah.
But also, why has he not mentioned it to anyone else? But I suppose technically he's mentioned it to the wife, but no one within his firm seems to know what this is about.
Yeah.
So then Mr. Almond, who is obviously the solicitor, at this stage said that the relatives were pretty satisfied that the deceased had not come to his own death by fair means, and that the whole incident was one of the most extraordinary character. A porter at the train station named Haggis, which is a brilliant name. I don't know if this is his surname, I'm presuming it is, rather than his first name.
He's Scottish.
Okay.
We'll call him Haggis.
Said, and this goes back up the thing about the 15 shillings, he said that the deceased gave him 2 sovereigns to pay for his ticket that cost 1.45 and 6pence. He added that he handed him the balance in the compartment. So he handed him 15 shillings and 6pence, and that he handed him the balance in the train station about 20 minutes before the train started. So he's the one that confirms he definitely had 15 shillings and 6pence. Yet when the police find him at Leicester, he doesn't have that. Obviously, we have no idea whether he had the 1,200 or not. But if you want to suppose that he did, the fact that the other money, that loose change, has also gone missing. Has it just been missed and not found in the carriage? Was he not searched properly? Or has someone taken it? This is never really answered. So then next, a Mr. Beasley of the firm Seligman and Co. in London spoke of the deceased writing 3 letters in his office on the Friday and received a telegram announcing that his wife was better than the day before. He left about 5 p.m. Now, this threw something up for me. If you remember, he wrote in the letters to the wife. So it confirms the 3 letters and that he wrote 3 that morning. However, if you remember in the letter to the wife, he wrote that the meeting was to be due at 4:30, so he wouldn't be able to leave for 5. The man at the firm said he left at 5, which then threw to me, did the meeting not happen the second time? So he didn't collect the debt of 1,200 because the man didn't show again or didn't produce the money.
Or did he get it at lunch? This is why the meeting at 4:30 never happened, because it already happened earlier. That's why. So
they met earlier than they originally planned.
So that's why he wrote the PS, got the money, and then that's why the letter's gone.
Possibly, I didn't think about that. But again, I'm not convinced about the suicide theory. But if you want to throw that back in there, if he wasn't able to collect that debt and he owed it, could this be a possible motive for him killing himself? He's now past his deadline of when he's supposed to have that money by. Again, this meeting's been cancelled. He hasn't got the money. That's a large amount of money. Is he in so much trouble that he's thinking, even though obviously they won't pay out on the latest life insurance, they'll pay out on his old ones? Is he thinking, well, I've got no other choice? I don't believe the suicide thing, but if you want to throw this in, it adds to a possibility, especially as we've already discovered. It's so incredibly difficult for someone to have murdered him. It's just as difficult for someone to have murdered him as it is for him to have committed suicide. So very strange. So at this point, the coroner alluded to the fact that 15 shillings and 6pence had been in the possession of the deceased shortly before he left London, and yet not a penny had been found on his person in Leicester. Moreover, it was fair to presume that if he'd been paid the 1,200, it should have followed the 15 shillings and 6pence. Under all the circumstances, he suggests that there should be an adjournment in order to penetrate to the bottom of the apparent mystery. But it was, so that's how you use it. So this for me is where I'm like, robbery. That would be your motive for murder, wouldn't it?
Or he somehow home aloned it, so he strung everything up, so like he's hanging out the window. There's some string involved. He shoots himself. He falls back. The string closes the window somehow. the police end up robbing him of that money, because, you know, they could be iffy. They can see some money, they steal it, and then it's that. But that, I don't know. I don't know.
It's so strange. Obviously, the inquest was adjourned at this point. The only other thing I can think of in terms of the robbery, of how it would be carried out, obviously here there's no evidence he did collect the 1,200. But let's say he did, right? Maybe that was part of a criminal gang. Let's go with that theory. Obviously, someone from that gang, or the person that gave him the money that day, if that person then turned up on the train, that he would know that that was the person he gave the money to, so he knows there's going to be a problem. He's already going to be a bit distressed. So maybe if it was a criminal gang, they arranged to meet and gave him the money, but the gang already needed the money, so they'd already put someone in place to rob him on the train to get their money back. Does that make sense? So that would be the motive. It would obviously account for the robbery, but also explain why he was murdered. So at this point, this is the only sort of plausible theory I'm sort of thinking could have happened in terms of the murder. So then next, a Leicester correspondent telegraphs that the police at that point expressed a strong belief that Mr. Lowe was murdered, and are now directing their efforts to prove the accuracy of the statement that he received the 1,200 on the Friday. There is no record, however, in the deceased book of such sum being owing. The 15 shillings given to the deceased as change at St Pancras cannot be found. It was supposed that the assailant entered the compartment at London and quitted at St Albans, Luton or Bedford when the train stopped. So that was always that's left. So then this leaves me thinking, like I said, I think possibly robbery is at this point the only motive for what they've got. And like I said, they've sent someone within the gang to rob him on the way home. If it was murder, why wasn't there more blood? And why didn't the guard notice anyone get in? That's what I want to know. Yeah, so I want to know who it could have been. The thing that gets me about this is still about the murder, and I understand why they couldn't decide between suicide and murder. The thing that gets me is, like I said, there's not enough blood inside the carriage. So the only other thing, like I said, that this thing that they've not really considered significant, but it's the only thing that was disturbed within the carriage, apart from his bullet wound to the head, was the broken umbrella. So that would suggest if he was murdered, maybe there was a bit of a kerfuffle in the carriage, and the umbrellas got broken in the process. So could he either have tried to use the umbrella to defend himself, or was the umbrella even his? No one ever said whether he got on with an umbrella. So could the umbrella have been belonging to someone else? But either way, this person's a super sleuth to get out. Because like I said, they can't unlock it from the inside.
No.
There's not enough blood staining. He obviously, they're supposing he wasn't shot inside the carriage because there's no blood spatter. Which means he has to be shot outside. In which case, if you want to go back to the suicide, that's the only way that he could plausibly be shot outside of the carriage.
And maybe there might still be some blood on the outside of the train somewhere. And he didn't die straight away after he shot himself.
That's what I thought, and he fell
backwards. Somehow closed the window with the umbrella, maybe. I don't know. I don't know.
This is what I'm saying. I can't. This is, like I said, we're not going to solve it.
No.
But I don't understand how. I don't think it was a suicide. No. I don't think there's enough. He clearly wasn't unhappy. Like, you know, even in his tone to the letters. There's so much surrounding. Like, what is this debt? What's the debt for?
I don't know.
Did he get it? If he did get it, was he robbed? If he didn't get it, then he wasn't robbed. So is a suicide more plausible?
But how? It's so
like
confusing.
I said, yeah, I know. Like I said, the only thing that goes that to me that could possibly make the suicide plausible was the thing about the thumb and it misfiring, because he would have struggled to do it thumb. He could have shot himself that way. That was the only way that he could have shot himself that way without causing the singeing. But, and it also would explain maybe why the gun misfired. Not because the gun was anything wrong with the gun, but because the force wasn't enough. But it was enough to pop the chamber through. And it was the second shot that killed him. But like I said, the only thing that disproves the suicide theory was the fact that the window was shut. But is there any way that in the train moving, the window could have accidentally popped back down by itself? Do you see what I mean? So if, you want to go back to suicide, he shot himself outside. Like I said, he didn't die instantaneously. He sort of flopped backwards. either when he's fallen back in, he's knocked a window and it's come down, or it's fallen down. Because like I said, I imagine, like I said, it was like the old sash windows that you push up. Yeah. Maybe in the process of it moving, even if he had opened it, it naturally just fallen it down by itself. That's the only way for me then that I can see that the suicide would be a plausible thing. And like I said, if you want to believe that he didn't collect the payment,
but that only works if you went like underneath, not the over sash way.
But again, I don't understand how this person... To me, the only way the assailant got in there was for them to already be in there. But that Benjamin guy said that he specifically picked that carriage because it was empty. So that means there wasn't... Because before I read this newspaper article, I was certain in my head that it wasn't a suicide. It was more than likely a murder, and that person was already in the carriage. And it wasn't him that wanted to be undisturbed, like Mr. Groves had suggested. It was the other person in the carriage, and they just put it down because it was night time anyway. Yeah. They wanted it to be dark and quiet. And that actually it was the other person was already in the carriage at the station, killed him, and then got off somewhere and managed to escape the police. But
he didn't want to share his carriage that much. He murdered someone.
But then again, Benjamin was so adamant that he'd specifically picked that because there wasn't anyone in there, and he'd gone against him and locked it.
And after like the first attempt of you trying to kill yourself, would you really go through with it the second time?
I guess it depends how quickly you did it.
Yeah, because it's like... it doesn't work.
Yeah. It's just, it's very strange. Like, well, obviously not going to answer, but I was kind of hoping I think it's more than likely a murder, but I can't explain how the murderer would have done it or got away.
There's got to be like another way in or out, right?
All I said, is this umbrella in it? Something to do with it?
It's the umbrella person who was witnessed at the Kennedy assassination. They have something to do with it. I don't know.
Because I'm just thinking, obviously they're saying the bullet matched that gun, but I'm just thinking, could the gun have been a decoy? Could it not have been that gun? Like, was there just another gun about?
That's what I was thinking. Does it match? But then he's still
and it just so happened
in the head.
Yeah. And
was he actually shot in the head, or was the umbrella that really pointy end? So
I wondered, could it be like? I feel like this is really far-fetched and it's probably not this, but if you wanted to go back to the whole Florence thing, could it have been a spy thing and the umbrella was like a gun?
A gun, yeah. Maybe they probably didn't even look at the umbrella.
Well, that's what it said in the court. That's what the coroner said, that no one on that day, either the police, they'd mentioned the umbrella, but no one had looked at it as its importance. But that was the only thing in the carriage that was disturbed.
It's the umbrella. It's the same police officers who disregarded the handkerchief from the other case, even though it was it was on the body.
Yeah, and covered in blood.
Yeah, they're like, oh, this has nothing to do with it. A hammer, 10 miles away, yes.
But yeah, I don't...
The hammer did it, that's what it...
But yeah, so one, I can't decide. Like I said, I think the suicide is highly unlikely, but I also can't explain how the murderer escaped. So, does that make the suicide plausible? Because you know when you have like really freak things... Yeah. Could it have been a suicide? It was just really freak, but the only reason for him committing suicide to me was if he couldn't collect that debt.
Yes.
That to me is the only plausible thing.
Yeah.
Because it would ensure his family's taken care of, because the other, even though he wouldn't have had that latest payout, all of his other ones would have paid out. And like I said, in terms of his business and looked into, he had his normal debts. You know, like when businesses take out loans, but they said he had no more debts than the average businessman. And at that point in time, all of his bills were paid on time. So his business wasn't in any trouble. Which makes me think this money was something completely unrelated to the business. Yeah. It was his own private money that he'd either put in or he'd won through some sort of bet. Or like I said, it was some criminal activity that the police just weren't able to link him to.
You've presented a very difficult and very interesting case.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I just really like this. I was like, it was a fucking ball ache to find that newspaper, but the newspaper thing, it's not different from the book. I see why the guy wrote it in the way he did, because the way he sort of done it is the only sort of relevant concrete information. But like I said, this newspaper article was the only other thing. And like I said, it does confirm a lot of what the book said about the guard being the one that let him on. He was the only one in the carriage. It backs all that up. And about all of his business accounts, everything being fine. So I'm guessing this guy that wrote the book has probably used this article as a source, and I'm presuming he must have also had access to actual court records.
Yes, I assume so.
And obviously the newspaper wouldn't have reported the whole thing. So there's nothing, it's not like anything that this newspaper article says disproves what the book, it doesn't conflict anything in the book, it just adds slightly more detail, but in adding slightly more detail, it raises more questions. It doesn't solve whether it's going to be a suicide or a murder. And like I said, if it is murdered, who would be the murderer? The only way I can see it being a murder, like I said, is a robbery, and it's someone that's related to the person who owed in the debt, that then it was already planned that they were going to rob him on the way back home to get the money back.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, I don't know. This case.
I know, it's a good one. I just, like I said, I love finding these sort of cases. Like, we're not going to solve them, but it's just something, I think it's so different. They're really juicy because they really get your mind ticking. Like, you're trying to think.
I think that's why the older ones are probably really good. That's why they're still unsolved, because it's so mysterious. Also, it's on a train. Trains just add a little bit more mystery to it.
Well, I just like, because I really enjoyed my Florence case. Yes. And when I came across this, I was like, ooh, another railway one. So I was just like, I really wanted to sink my teeth into a good sort of murder mystery that I said, we're not going to be able to solve it. But it's just so unusual. It's so unlike any of the others. Like, the others you could say, yeah, I think it was this or that. It was just, for me, the thing that stood out was the fact the court hadn't even decided whether it was suicide or murder. Because I've not come across another case like that yet. It's basically everything is unknown. Yeah. Apart from the fact he was shot in the head and that's what killed him. But yeah, because I tried to think over in my head every possibility. Like, could he have been dead before he got in?
Someone came in from the roof, stabbed him in the head with the umbrella, and then left. And then dropped a gun.
Yeah, as a decoy.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's, for me, even with the Benjamin guy saying that it was what was classed as a bogey carriage, I'm still not convinced that gun would not have fallen off.
No, because that means the railway track is completely flat at all times for more than 100 miles. No,
yeah.
No way.
No, it's not going to happen.
No.
So, like I said, that for me, then it's got to have happened at the stop before, or even, like I said, as you're pulling into Leicester. But Leicester was a big station. You think for the times there wasn't many train stations. Leicester would have been a major train station. There would have been people about. Like I said, even if you want to go with the murderer getting out something like off the top, someone would have seen that murderer, even in the dark.
Yeah.
Because you think as the train's coming in, the train station's lit up, someone would have noticed. And like I said, moving off a jumping train is another feat altogether.
Would it be lit up by candle and flame, though?
It's like lantern sort of thingies. But it would have been well enough lit, because it's got to remain well enough lit that
but there'll be lots
people
of
can
shadows
see.
and stuff. I don't know.
And there would be workmen, because like I said, going back to the thing, it's not like the train comes in and stops. You need these men to grease the wheels as it comes in and as it goes again. So there would have constantly been workmen on the track. So it's not like the station was empty and there was only a station master. Even if there wasn't many passengers, there would have been workers around, and these workers would have been on the track at the time.
It's a very interesting case. I don't know, it's confusing, isn't it? But you presented it well.
Yeah, I really like that time period in terms of cases. They've got some really good juicy cases.
Yeah,
as I said, they're very difficult to research, but I think that's partly why I enjoy it, because you've got to like really get into it and really embed into it. And I said, I don't know, maybe I will have to start, once more money starts rolling and I can pay for all these things, I'll have unlimited access to the archives. But yeah, that's a big thing at the moment, is there's so much you can get for free, but not all of it. And that's where it took me so long to find this, because I couldn't put in specific things. I literally had to trawl through it, and I was very close to giving up. Because like I said, even with the book itself, it still proved a good mystery. I had so many questions that I wanted to answer them, and it wasn't answered in that bit of the book. So see, this book, it contains lots of different murders, so it doesn't go into great detail. It just covers the basic facts. But yeah, I had a lot of questions myself, and I was like, I need to find out the answers for these. I tried putting him in ancestry things, his name wasn't coming up. There was very names that were very similar, and I just couldn't find anything, and I was like, oh my god, I'm not going to be able to find out anymore. So I was very relieved when I found this newspaper article. But yeah, like I said, it helps, I think, in terms of clarifying things, and I quite liked the little letters as well.
Yes.
And I know you'd like the little letters. Yeah. But yeah, I don't think as though it answered any of my questions. It's more added more to the list. So maybe everyone could comment on the thing and put in their sort of theories as what they think happened. They might have something that we've not even thought of. So yeah, if you could comment that in, then we'll find out what you think. Even if it's just about the episode, whether you like the episode or not, add in what theories you think you might have. You never know. We might come to some sort of conclusion.
We might do, yes.
Or highly unlikely, but we might do.
Yeah, we're going to solve a
unsolvable case.
Yes, yes, exactly. That's what it is.
But yes. Anyway, on that note, in the meantime,
keep creeping,
and we'll keep digging.